Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network. As you guys know, there has been an ongoing battle against the World Health Organization pandemic agreement, pandemic treaty. The name has changed several times, but you know what I'm talking about. This is a worldwide agreement which most of the nations are signing on to. It's coming up in just a couple of weeks. And if this agreement does go through, many of us, including myself, fear that this could be another step in the direction of world government and in the direction of taking away sovereignty of individual nation states and eventually of individuals like us, free people like us around the world. And as you've been seeing online, there's videos, there's petitions, there's lots of efforts going to try to raise awareness to this. It's even got to the point where Tedros over at the World Health Organization has started saying there's conspiracy theorists speaking against our agreement and they're all lies, don't pay any attention to them. But we know that this is a big piece of the globalist chess game and that we need to stop it. We need to resist it. We need to push back. And my guest today is somebody who is working night and day to resist this and to push this and to organize around it and to try to get people excited to get on the road and to go in person to push back against the World Health Organization. So please, everybody, welcome Dan Astin-Gregory. How are you doing, brother?
Oh, great, Derrick. Thanks so much for being here. Yeah, and what a wonderful introduction. You really summarized kind of the kind of headline issues that we're facing here. And, this campaign is really designed to address that and really draw a line so we can commit to our future. So thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. Thank you. Well, before we get into that, because I want to talk about all the great things you guys have coming up and encourage everybody to join, but let's do a little bit of background. And I think this is the first time you're on my channel. I've been on your channel. But for folks who don't know, Dan and I first met almost a year ago in June of last year in the UK at the Better Way conference. And, I was extremely impressed by your work, Dan, and the talk that you gave there, which is why I invited you to come down to Mexico just a couple months ago for the Greater Reset 5. And despite almost losing your voice completely, you gave another amazing speech and had a really great time from what I can see, and everybody was very impressed by you. So I've been just honored to get to know you better over the last year and to get connected, and now we're working on some really big things together. But why don't you share a bit about your background and your work and your passions for my audience who might not be familiar?
Thanks, Derrick. So in terms of the context of what we're talking about here, I'll keep it focused on that because there's a wider backstory about what I was doing with my life pre-pandemic. But very early on during the course of the COVID chapter, straight out the gate in January, I was paying very close attention. And I'll tell you, it was for personal reasons because my wife and I were flying into Asia for our honeymoon. And when I got wind of this story taking place in China, I was concerned from a personal perspective that our honeymoon could be jeopardized. So it started with selfish reasons, but hopefully later on became selfless. But I paid very, very keen attention to what was happening. And day by day, there was a divergence between what the media narratives were saying and what I believe the underlying data and insights were showing. So this wedge kept growing and growing, and everything felt very much out of integrity with the reality and the truth of the matter. And the worse this became, the more and more pained I felt witnessing this happening and seeing the state of humanity in the face of these measures, from lockdowns to mandates to, importantly, what was happening to the kids. My wife and I were thinking of starting a family at that time. And I was seeing the way that the children were being treated in school. And I literally saw a photo one day of children in Perspex boxes, kept isolated from one another in Perspex boxes. And I just happened to be walking past a local school and the playgrounds were empty and there was this deadly silence. And in that moment, I decided I had to do something. So the very next morning I took to I just picked up my mobile phone and I hit the live button and I spoke for 20 minutes about what I was witnessing in the state of the world. And I was nervous about doing that because I had a lot of work that I was doing in business and I was worried what people would think, because at that point the narratives were so intense that, if you even slightly go against the grain, then, you're chastised and you're abused and, called on all manner of things, which unfortunately still happens today, but it's a lot easier once you're actually taking that step in. So I recorded this video, 20 minutes, just straight from the heart. And lo and behold, it went viral. Hundreds of people were watching live. Before I'd finished the video, it was like a small stadium was watching. By the end of the weekend, 5,000 people had shared it. And by the end of that week, over 1 million people had watched that video. And the comments were just unbelievable. So many people saying that I was saying exactly what they were thinking, but no one else had yet said. So at that point, I'd had 5 or 6 years behind me in terms of creating podcasts and content. I thought, how do I follow this? Well, I'm gonna create a show and just document everything that I believe is not right about what's happening here. And I launched the Pandemic Podcast, and 1,000 episodes later, 15 to 20 million views. And I think we were one of the early movers in the UK to really talk about this at scale. And we interviewed some amazing doctors, scientists, politicians, public health experts, the public. We really brought daily insights to what was going on and really built a community around it, Derrick. And then that led me to becoming heavily involved in the activism, worked very, very closely with the activist leaders here in the UK. In fact, brought together 40 to 50 different groups to collaborate against these restrictions and mandates. Co-founded the Together Declaration, which we successfully overcame the vaccine passports. We launched a campaign with another group, which prevented over 100,000 NHS workers from losing their jobs due to the vaccine mandates, and more. The story goes on. We hosted the first ever physical congress in the United Kingdom to tackle the issues during COVID, and I just haven't stopped, quite frankly. And this January, when we met again in Mexico, I from the stage with my croaky voice launched Free Humanity, which is a new organization which is designed to advance and defend our liberties. And that's my life path now, Derrick. My path, I'm on the road to freedom, which is actually one of our initial campaigns, and there's no turning back. It's really emboldened a mission that was already alive within me, and it's just given me a new fire, a new commitment, particularly now actually being a father. We went from planning to be parents to now being parents, and as having my son, who's 2.5 years old now, my driving force is making sure that he grows up in a world where he has equal or greater freedoms, opportunities, and rights than I did. And I consider myself to be privileged. We lived in a time in the United Kingdom where we had reasonable rights and freedoms, and then that all changed in 2020, and the world turned upside down, and the rest is history. So
thank you. No, thank you, brother, for all your work. Truly, I've said this before, but it really does give me peace of mind, and despite all the chaos and amidst all the chaos, to know that as hard as I work and the other people that I know who are working in my circles, to know that there's people like yourself where you're at, and I'm sure there's other folks who are working just as hard, and then knowing we have allies in Australia and India and Germany, and it just really, I think for those at home who are listening, if you ever start to feel alone or doubt that there's work being done, and maybe it's because you haven't stepped up to the plate, just be assured that there are people like Dan and many others who are working just so hard to do what you said, Dan, to make sure that your son and the future generations do have the freedoms that we had, and even more so. I wanted to ask you one more thing about that, if you don't mind, before we get into Geneva. If I saw correctly on your Facebook page recently, you actually, when your son was born, you even had more trouble with the hospital trying to prevent you from being there. Is that something you'd like to share for a moment?
Yeah, so during the early stages of my wife's pregnancy, it's routine to go in for scans to check the health of the baby, etc. And we were due to go in for our scan and to determine, you get the choice to find out the sex of your baby. And we decided we wanted to know that, so we wanted to start thinking ahead. And when I arrived at the hospital with my wife, they said, due to COVID restrictions, only one of us can go in. And quite clearly, I wasn't the pregnant one. So I felt completely aggrieved by that. This is a moment, in a father's life that you cherish. You want to be able to be there and witness that beautiful beating heart on the screen and sharing that magic moment with your loved one. And, to have that potentially denied, it infuriated me. Now, of course, there are two ways that you can respond to that. Well, there's several ways you could respond to that. And I could allow that infuriation to kind of boil over and become aggressive, but I politely and calmly stated my position. And, that the workers said they're just following policy, of course, to the old adage of just following orders. But I just didn't stop there. I insisted on speaking to senior management, and the whole issue got escalated to the actual top level leadership of the hospital that day. So we went away, and when I finally spoke to the leader of the hospital, they understood my point, and they actually agreed that the policy wasn't right. And we got the policy overturned, and we went back the very same day. And fortunately, my wife and I were able to go and have that scan and that magic moment together and discover that we had a little boy on the way. And to see that beating heart was just one of the most magical moments. And to think that, I could have been deprived from that, but I had to think about all the other fathers that perhaps didn't have the nerve or the knowledge or the courage to take a stand in that moment would have missed out. And I know so many have missed out. And I was at the birth of my child. I was there. Thank goodness they weren't going to prohibit that. But I know that many other families weren't able to be together during the birth of their children at other points during the COVID chapter. So it's so important that we don't forget, Derrick, what's gone before us, because when we go on to talk about the WHO, actually a lot of what the WHO is threatening is actually going to normalize, not just normalize, but legitimize and legalize what happened during COVID. So it's easy to get a sense of kind of collective amnesia about what happened. It's a traumatic event, and actually, like any trauma, it can either plague you on a daily basis, or it can just disappear. It disappears into the depths of your psyche because you, as a protection mechanism. And in many ways, I understand how people want to get on with their lives, during this period of relative freedom comparatively. But it's important that we don't forget, because once it's happened before, it can happen again. And not only can it happen again, when you've got things like this treaty and this set of amendments to the international health regulations, like I said, it's a risk that we actually create a pandemic industry out of this, and any potential threat or deemed threat or potential threat in the future could trigger the whole machine to come alive again, and not just come alive this time, but be imposed and enforced. And that's why this conversation today is so important, because I'm not convinced at this point, Derrick, that the masses actually understand what they're facing here and the urgency of the situation.
I agree. And Dan, for one, thanks, for your courage, and so glad you got to have that moment with your family, and very beautiful. And as you said, this is why people are still pushing back. Yes, there's so many people who have kind of gone back to normal, or, gone back to their normal routines. Like I can say, for example, here in Mexico, or even in the States, we had a flood of Canadians coming during COVID, people getting out of the UK, people who could get out of Germany, people who could get out of Australia, making their way to Mexico, because Mexico ended up being one of only 2 countries that didn't have tests or quarantines or any of that sort of stuff. So we saw a flood of all these people. I would estimate in the tens of thousands of Canadians and expats from elsewhere. And some of them were taking things very seriously and had sold everything they owned and moved their life to Mexico and were looking for land. Others, of course, weren't trying to abandon their entire lives, but were trying to stay safe for, during the craziness. And once things kind of calmed down, people have gone back home. And some of them, I've lost touch with. I'm assuming they went back to doing whatever they were doing before this, which I think is unfortunate, because we know that these agendas are not over. And that's exactly why we're here to talk today about your new initiative, because these same people who push these agendas in the last 3 to 4 years are still in power in many cases, and in some cases have been given promotions and even more power, and they want to continue these agendas. I've been really harping on the Summit of the Future coming up in September in New York City. This WHO treaty is just another piece of that same puzzle. So let's go ahead and get into this and tell everybody all about the initiative that you've got going on here.
Yeah, so we're working in collaboration. So Free Humanity, as we said from stage at the Greater Reset this year, thanks to your kind invitation, we not only announced the birth of Free Humanity, but we actually invited all of the attendees onto the stage to join us in saying no to the WHO. We were very clear, given that this deadline was coming up around the pandemic treaty and the international agreements, that we had to operate fast. There's a lot of, as you alluded to, there's lots of what I would describe as threats to our liberties on the horizon, but they don't come with a fixed deadline. There's a lot of things that are in motion, that are in trajectory, and some of those things are, practical in nature, and other things are more philosophical. It's a kind of a way of life that we've become accustomed to, this safetyism, that everything is a risk. So we knew that the WHO posed a real threat to our freedoms, and for all the reasons we've just talked about, that would really risk normalizing what happened during COVID, but also create an industry, to build an industry out of pandemics, and to effectively, in many ways you could describe it, become a racket for the pharmaceutical industrial complex. So Free Humanity was born really to be a coalition forming organization. We want to partner with people all over the world, because as I outlined during the United Kingdom, we formed an underground group working with 40 to 50 different groups in the United Kingdom to tackle many of these issues. And we overcame many barriers to collaboration, to find ways to partner together to overcome our differences in order to tackle these impositions upon our freedom. And Free Humanity was launched to do the same thing on a kind of international level. So this first campaign is working in partnership with a number of different organizations, and I'm delighted to say that there are organizations like the Inspired Network who we're working with, who originated something called the Geneva Project, and with Maria Huber-Mogg in Europe, who has been an outstanding activist all over Europe, who's also driving a crowd resilience project. And all three of us came together because independently we were working on initiatives around the WHO, and we said, well, we're all speaking of a mission of working together to tackle these things and building coalitions. Why don't we come together? So we've come together under the banner of the Geneva Project, and we've launched the Road to Geneva. Now, the Geneva Project is a really interesting project because, to your point around all these different agendas and trajectories, it's coming to a point actually, Derrick, where, and I don't know if you've experienced this in the US and Mexico and different parts of the world that you visited, and I don't like to say it, but there's almost, after COVID, there's almost like a collective apathy that's begun to unfold. You know, there's a sense of being tired, and feel like I pick up on a sense of kind of hopelessness and a powerlessness against all these, you know, relentless threats to our freedom. So in the face of that, we wanted to create something to actually remind people of the power that they have to create change. And we also wanted to create something that not only powerfully said no to the WHO, as you can see here on the screen, but we wanted to create a campaign where we actually draw a line, where we say enough is enough. We will no longer abide by the rule of the unelected, unaccountable global bureaucrats. We will draw a line, and we will march beyond that line into a future where we determine on our own right to freedom, to self-determination and independence. And the Road to Freedom, our component of this project, is really inviting people on a road trip of a lifetime, a road trip with a mission, because many of us saw the impact that the Canadian convoy had during the times of COVID, and the solidarity that brought and the international attention it brought to the issues. So we wanted to create something like that, where we invite people all across Europe and around the world to come and join us in Geneva, because there's an incredible rally taking place on Saturday, the 1st of June, in the heart of Geneva. In fact, right outside the United Nations headquarters. It's actually been moved from where it says on the website there. We're now meeting outside the United Nations to take a firm stance that we reject these global agendas, but we fully embrace our own right to self-determination. So in many ways, we're going there to declare and proclaim our own freedom, to proclaim our own independence, and to determine our own future. So rather than simply just rejecting the pandemic agreements and the international health regulations, we are there to say we are going to chart our own course. So we're inviting people from all over Europe and around the world to join us, to draw that line with us, because as you said, Derrick, and you know, thanks to all the work you're doing, you're helping to really shine a light on a lot of those wider issues that are unfolding. We want to make a firm statement that we will not follow that path. We're creating a fork in the road. We're creating our own road to freedom, and our invitation is to as many of you at home to come and join us in Geneva for this, what we believe in. You know, you can't really call a campaign historic until it's happened. But our intention is this is a moment we look back in history, and the people that came to Geneva will look back on that time and say that was a defining moment in history where the tables begun to turn. So we see this as a really important campaign to really take charge of our own destiny, and to send a very clear message that these agendas, these overarching trajectories that just a small number of people and small number of organizations are putting together, we will reject those, and we will continue to march forward to our own drumbeat. We will create our own freedom, and we will create our own future. And that's, Derrick, this is really what it's all about. So in one hand, yes, we're still powerfully saying no. You could say, you know, in sport, you have an offense and a defense. All of the campaigning we've been doing so far is our defense. Now we need to start on the offense. And by offense, it doesn't mean we're attacking. It actually means we're creating. We're here to create. We're here to peacefully create the future we want to live in. And that's why there's so much synergy with your work, Derrick, because, you know, everything I've experienced at the Greater Reset myself firsthand and the People's Reset it is about that forward focus and creating the world that we want to live in. So in a nutshell, this campaign is about powerfully saying no to the WHO and saying yes to our freedom and our future.
Beautiful. And I would think part of that too, as well, is, as it says, they're traveling with thousands of freedom lovers to take part in this, what I believe will be a historic rally, Dan. And I do, again, appreciate the effort you're making. Everybody, the website is roadtogeneva.com. And as you can see here, for those who are watching the screen, they can sign up here to join the campaign. And then I'm assuming they'll just get some updates about next steps and how to be involved.
Yes, actually. So we have a new microsite that's going to be launched now, which is going to have all the different details about the different roads and routes that people are taking from across Europe, different ways to support the campaign, different ways to get involved. It's really a people-led grassroots campaign. So there's lots of ways for people to get involved. Everything from volunteering, marshalling, first response, route coordination. There's a whole way, a plethora of ways that people can support this campaign. So we invite you to come and join us. Enter your details into the website and let us know you're coming. Then you'll get details of our Telegram channels, where we'll get real-time updates on things as we progress. And we really want to build a community. And actually, you picked up on freedom lovers. It originally said freedom fighters, and we said we're tired of fighting. We're bringing together freedom lovers, people who love freedom, that want to actually bring a new energy into Geneva. You imagine it. You've got the United Nations headquarters in there. You've got the WHO. You've got Davos in Switzerland as well. We wanted to come in with a whole energy shift into Geneva, this heart of the beast, and to bring a whole different vibe, a whole different energy. We get in, we say our thing, we do we leave our message, we make our mark, and then we leave. And we do so peacefully, with love, with high vibes. We really shift the energy in that power center, and then we go back to our lives with that message of freedom in our hearts and independence and self-declaration. And if we have time, I have a really interesting story about why Switzerland happens to be such a powerful location for such a campaign to unfold. And it's not just because the United Nations and the WHO are located there. So if we have time, I'll tell the story.
Go for it, brother, please.
So I love a great origin story, and I discovered this from one of our European partners, who's Alexander Ehrlich, who's been monumental across Europe during this last few years. He, despite not being Swiss himself, he's got an enormous mind when it comes to the history of Europe. And he told me the story of how Switzerland came to fruition. And he told the story how these three different cantons, and canton just means region, three different regions in this area at the time, which was not yet called Switzerland, in this geographical location. And they were under the rule of this tyrannical dynasty. This dynasty had this huge overreach and dominance over this area. So these three different regions decided that enough was enough, and that they were going to come together in unity and proclaim their freedom, their independence, and their right to self-determination in unity. So they created something called the Rootly Oath. It's an oath that they took together. It's become mythical now. No one actually knows the specific words that this oath represented. But they came and swore this oath together, these three cantons, these three regions, which represented thousands of people. And they said, we will determine our own future from this point forth. And they overthrew the dynasty. And that became the beginning. It became the origin story of Switzerland. Switzerland was formed in the coming months and years from that moment where they swore that independence. So it's so pertinent, because that effectively is what we are going to go and do in Switzerland, in Geneva, is to swear our right to freedom, to independence and self-determination. And we're going to do so in unity with our brothers and sisters and comrades from all over Europe and all over the world. So it's so magical how that story fuels what we're going there to do. It's so synergistic that it just brings a whole new level to why it's important to come and join us in person in Geneva. I know that people,
absolutely,
there's a lot of hoops people have to jump through to get there. And we talk about the road trip, but actually, it doesn't matter if you fly, you take a train, a boat, you cycle, you walk. We don't care how you get there. Just find a way. This is the invitation to you, wherever you are in the world. Come and join us in Geneva on the 1st of June to be an experience where you will look back over the course of your life and say, I was there. When we look back at some of the most important civil moments in our history for our civil liberties and our rights, we can all look back in the history books and see those moments and wonder what it would be like to have been there at the time. Well, this is your opportunity to be there this time around, and look back in history yourself when your children, your grandchildren grow up, and they will tell the story of their relations and what they learned from that experience. And that's the invitation, is to come and be there with us.
I love it, Dan. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I think it, like you said, it does add a whole nother layer to the experience. Again, everybody, the website is theroadtogeneva.com. Say no to the WHO, the Road to Geneva Citizens Convoy, happening May 30th and June 1st. I encourage you to follow Dan Astin-Gregory. I'll put all his links below, and of course, a link to the website. If you are able to make it, document it. Share it with the world, share it with your people. We need more people to know this is even taking place, that the WHO treaty is going on, that all these globalist meetings are taking place, but more importantly, that people like us, people like Dan, and all those who are joining are getting organized and doing something about it. We can't allow ourselves to be lulled back into apathy or into complacency. We must realize that truly the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. There will always be another tyrant ready to step up and try to take away the next generation's freedom, Dan, your son's freedom, and his children's freedom. So we must try to stand up when we can, as you said, in the moments where it matters. I mean, for one, I know I'm grateful, I know you are, to look back on the last few years and to know that I stood up when it really mattered. And for all of those who stood up in the past, just recognize that our fight is unfortunately not over. But at the same time, as you said, Dan, we can shift from always being on this defensive to focusing on love and positivity and creating and building the world that we do want. So part of this, to me, what I see in your effort, Dan, is, as you said, saying no to them, but also reclaiming that sovereignty and saying, we're going to do our own things. We're going to create our own treaties and our own people's summits and all the things that they think that they're doing when they're speaking for us. Instead, we step up and say, we have our own voices. We speak for ourselves. No, thank you. You do your thing, and we're going to build what we want for the future. So thank you so much, Dan, for joining us today. Any other closing thoughts before we let you go?
Yeah, I think it's pertinent to share, our partners at the Geneva Project. You can also check out the genevaproject.org, because that weekend there's a whole manner of events taking place. So if you've been at the Greater Reset or the People's Reset, you'll know that the power of having those really focused conversations on solutions. Well, there's actually a summit taking place on the Friday in Geneva. It's invite only. So if you're someone that's actively working to shape the future of healthcare or contribute to the freedom of humanity, that the door is wide open for you. There's a press conference on the Saturday morning, which is going to be decoding what just happened during the World Health Assembly gathering that week. And then, of course, we have the monumental rally in the afternoon. So the team at the Geneva Project are an incredible group of human beings that I'm delighted to be partnering with. And if you want to find out more about the overall components that are taking place, you can also check out the genevaproject.org. And to remind people, if you want to come and join us on that road trip with the mission, it's roadtogeneva.com. So thank you so much, Derrick, and I really appreciate our conversation today.
Absolutely, brother. And I look forward to working more with you in the future. Everybody stay tuned, because we've got some big things coming up as well later this summer. And that's where we're going to leave it for today, guys. As always, please remember to subscribe. And remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful,